We welcome you to another Sunday School lesson. Sunday School is a blessing and gift from God. After 70 years of captivity, God was restoring the freedom to worship Him, to His people at Jerusalem. During the reign of the Persian king Cyrus, the foundation of the temple was laid, but work stopped until the second year of King Darius, which was about 520 BC, or 16 years later. There was both outside and inside opposition that caused this delay. There were Judah's enemies who mocked the building project. Israelites put their own interests first and became lax in finishing the work. Because of this, the Lord sent a famine throughout Judah, draining the people of their resources. The building project was resumed under the leadership of Zerubbabel and Jeshua, accompanied by God's prophets, some 16 years after the foundation was finished. At that time Tatnai and Shethar-boznai, the Persian officials placed in Israel along with others, wanted to know who gave the returning captives the authority to rebuild the temple. As a result, they sent a letter to King Darius and asked him to investigate this. Our lesson begins with Darius' response in chapter 6. Our first verse says, King Darius then issued an order, and they searched in the archives stored in the treasury at Babylon. After the reign of King Cyrus, Cambyses ruled, followed by Darius, who reigned from 522 to 486 BC. During this time, Darius the king commanded that the records be searched to determine if Cyrus had actually made a decree permitting the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. This was in response to the respectful request of Tatnai, initiated in Judea, and described in the last part of Ezra 5. Verse 2 says, a scroll was found in the citadel of Ecbatana in the province of Media, and this was written on it, Memorandum. When the scroll detailing the decree was not found in Babylon, Darius didn't conclude that there was no such decree. He didn't abandon the search, but extended it to other areas. The document they sought was not found in Babylon but in Ecbatana, the capital of Media province, where the Persian kings maintained a summer palace, almost 300 miles northeast of Babylon. It's possible that there were some who didn't want to destroy the roll and instead hid it there. Or there could be those out of hatred for the Jews, had it hidden so they couldn't enjoy the benefit of the decree. Evidence of God's hand in the matter, plus Darius' determination, yielded good result. Verse 3 says, in the first year of King Cyrus, the king issued a decree concerning the temple of God in Jerusalem, let the temple be rebuilt as a place to present sacrifices, and let its foundations be laid. It is to be 60 cubits high and 60 cubits wide. In the first year of King Cyrus, he issued a decree giving the Jewish people who wanted to return to Jerusalem and Judea, the right to return and to repopulate Judea, and to rebuild Jerusalem. Not only did Cyrus give permission for the temple to be rebuilt as a place to present sacrifices, he commanded the funding of the work from the royal treasury. The decree also made sure that the building would be strong and resilient against natural calamity. Cyrus gave the limits of what they could build, instead of the actual dimensions of the new structure. Therefore the dimensions for the new temple can be larger than Solomon's temple, but within 60 cubits long by 60 cubits wide by 30 cubits tall. Verse 4 says, with 3 courses of large stones and 1 of timbers. The costs are to be paid by the royal treasury. The decree also said that the house of God at Jerusalem should have 3 layers of huge stones and 1 layer of timbers. There have been archaeological discoveries in modern-day Syria indicating timber was often used after several rows of stones, in order to protect the buildings from earthquakes. Solomon also used this process for the inner courtyard of his temple as well as his palace. The last part of this verse says, as a goodwill gesture, some of the expenses for building the temple would come out of the royal treasury. Those Jews who remained in exile in Babylon as well as their neighbors also gave to the construction of the temple. Verse 5 says, Also the gold and silver articles of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took from the temple in Jerusalem and brought to Babylon, are to be returned to their places in the temple in Jerusalem. They are to be deposited in the house of God. Furthermore, Cyrus ordered that the spoils taken from the temple some 2 generations before, be returned to the Jerusalem temple. These included the temple vessels and utensils made of gold and silver vessels to be restored, and brought again to the house of God. It was a remarkable example of God's providence, that so many of these gold and silver articles of the house of God still existed intact, and that King Cyrus commanded them to be returned to their proper places in the house of God. Verse 6 says, "Now then, Tattenai, governor of Trans-Euphrates, and Shethar-Bozenai and you other officials of that province, stay away from there." Based on the search and recovery of the relevant document from King Cyrus, Darius made the appropriate command to Tattenai, governor of the region beyond the river. King Darius knew Tattenai and Shethar-Bozenai and their companions wanted to hinder the construction of the temple, so he commanded them to allow the work on the temple and the city of Jerusalem to continue without interruption. Verse 7 says, "Do not interfere with the work on this temple of God. Let the governor of the Jews and the Jewish elders rebuild this house of God on its site." Still commanding Tattenai, Shethar-Bozenai, and their companions, the Apharsachites, to avoid opposing the building of the temple, the king also commanded them to do nothing to hinder the work. The king also commanded them to let the governor of the Jews and the elders of the Jews build this house of God in the same place it was in the past. As a result of the king's orders, the wrath of the Jews' enemies was restrained, and God was glorified in the rebuilding of the temple. Verse 8 says, "Moreover, I hereby decree what you are to do for these elders of the Jews in the construction of this house of God. Their expenses are to be fully paid out of the royal treasury, from the revenues of Trans-Euphrates, so that the work will not stop." Darius continued to give orders to the Jews' enemies, Tattenai, Shethar-Bozenai, and their companions the Apharsachites, by instructing them to help the work. They were to give money from taxes to the Jews, in order to finance their expenses. Previously the enemies of the Jews, in appealing to Darius, hoped to get an order to stop the work, but instead of that, they got an order to help fund some of the temple's construction expenses, from taxes collected west of Euphrates River, so the work will not stop. We don't know if Darius believed in Israel's God or not, but we do know that he honored the house of God with his financial generosity. Verse 9 says, "Whatever is needed, young bulls, rams, male lambs for burnt offerings to the God of heaven, and wheat, salt, wine, and olive oil, as requested by the priests in Jerusalem, must be given them daily without fail." Provisions were also made for continuing the temple services, for maintaining the sacrifices there, when it was completed. He ordered that they should be supplied with everything they wanted: young bulls, rams and lambs, for the burnt offerings of the God of heaven, and wheat, salt, wine, and oil for the meal offerings. They were to provide these things to the Jews according to the requests of the priests which are at Jerusalem, and the Persian officials must not let a day go by, when the Jews didn't have what they needed to serve their God in the temple. Verse 10 says, "So that they may offer sacrifices pleasing to the God of heaven and pray for the well-being of the king and his sons." Darius made arrangements for the various sacrifices, burnt, meal and peace, so that when the Jews offered those sacrifices they would also pray for the life of the king, and his family. King Darius knew that Jews were a praying people, and had heard that God was near them in everything that they called upon him for. He needed their prayers, and might be benefited by them. Verse 11 says, "Furthermore, I decree that if anyone defies this edict, a beam is to be pulled from their house and they are to be impaled on it. And for this crime their house is to be made a pile of rubble." Darius continued his orders saying, "If anyone changes this order, a wooden beam must be pulled from their house, and set up to hang him on. Not only would that person be hanged on timber from his destroyed house, the king added that his house be made a garbage dump. Darius enforces his decree with a penalty: anyone who oppose the work and service of the temple or withhold the support granted to it by the king, would be hanged. Our final verse says, "May God, who has caused his name to dwell there, overthrow any king or people who lifts a hand to change this decree or to destroy this temple in Jerusalem. I, Darius, have decreed it. Let it be carried out with diligence." The king continued by pronouncing a curse on all future kings and people, who should ever have any hand in the destruction of the house of God. What Darius would or maybe could not do himself to protect the temple, he desired that the God that caused his name to dwell there will destroy anyone who will change and destroy the temple at Jerusalem. The king then ended the decree with the words, "I, Darius, have made a decree, let it be done with speed." The temple was finally completed in the 6th year of Darius' reign. Free to worship. From this lesson we learn that the heart of kings is in the hand of God, and he turns it whatever way he pleases. Whatever they are, God makes them to be, for he removes and sets up kings. We also learn that when God's time has come for the accomplishing of his gracious purposes concerning his people, he will raise up instruments for our good who may be people we never expect to fulfill God's plans. Free to worship. 1. When God makes a plan, it will come to pass no matter how long it takes. Ezra 6:1-2. We should trust in his power and love, no opposition can stop him. 2. God's plans will always work out just as he lays them out. Ezra 6:3-5. As he inclined the heart of Darius, in this lesson, so he can do as he will among the armies of heaven, and the inhabitants of earth. 3. There may be opposition to God's plans, but nothing can stop them. Ezra 6:6-7. What we are doing presently that Satan is trying to prevent, will end victorious through Christ. 4. In order to fulfill his plans, God will provide help for his people, even from the unlikeliest places and people. Ezra 6:8-10. The opponents who would have hindered the progress of the temple rebuilding, were compelled not only to not hinder, but to help with great gifts. 5. Even ungodly kings can be used to warn people against opposing God's work. Ezra 6:11-12. Darius was wise to make the decree strong, with severe punishments against those who violated both the letter and the spirit of the rebuilding project. We are truly glad you spent time to learn this lesson with us. We hope you are blessed and may share these with somebody else. Thank you very much, have a great week, and God bless you always, dear brothers and sisters.